So, shall we take a dive into some of these questions that we've got from social media? I guess I firstly just want to say actually how humbled I am that we got these many responses. We will not have time to go through all of these today, but I'll do an article and bring some of them into the social media. So for anyone listening, you are important, and we'll cover the rest of the questions on there too. Okay, so I want to heal and grow, but sometimes I feel like I'm stuck in a cycle of self-help without real progress. How do I know that I'm actually healing? What do you think on this one?
I mean, sometimes it's difficult when we just get a snapshot of their problems. How do you know when they're self-healing? I think getting to know somebody in the course of the sessions and getting involved with them to build a relationship with them, to find out really where the starting point is. I think without a starting point, it's very difficult to know, where is the journey, where are they on that journey, until we can find out by talking to them about the relevant issues. Where are they now? In the here and now, where are they? And then work out where we can take them. Because healing, there's no hierarchy of healing as such. For everybody, it's going to be very different. Yeah. It's just really maybe finding out and setting them away on their journey.
Yeah, I agree. I think as well, something that I would emphasize is that it's not linear. The amount of times I hear people come back and talk about, I worked on this thing and now this has happened and I'm all over the place and I'm not doing enough. And we've worked on this in therapy before. I've been doing work around this and self-help. And then, there's all this judgment and shame and high expectations, but it's not linear. And exactly as you said, we have to approach it in like the here and now. And it's not always really obvious when there's healing, is there? It's small bits of difference over time.
And I think that it's a small steps. It's a small incremental bit. Not always look for the big changes. Counselling is a process where it might be an hour a week or a bit more, a bit less, but it will take time. And I think there has to be an element of patience with clients as well, to understand that they've had their whole life before they get into the first session, and we only know them from that first session and beyond. So healing does take time, and healing is different for everybody. I think that's really, for me, everybody's very different in terms of their actual healing and their own perception of healing, how they feel it, where it sits with them physically and psychologically. So I think healing is so important as a process of change. I mean, a lot of this is about change and growth and everything, which sounds quite grand and dramatic, but it can be very small to start with.
Very true. Yeah, we kind of expect this instant gratification, don't we, these days, in a lot of areas, not just in healing. And sometimes it is the smaller things, like I was in a good mood when I got up this morning, or I just had a really nice conversation with someone. And these are all part of it, isn't it? This is how it affects us when we work on ourselves. But we look for this big, grand, exactly as you said, like difference or transformation. And I've seen so many transformations with people that I've worked with, but over time, not this like instant version, not this thing that can be measured completely. Like it is when you reflect, when you notice those differences, when you see it in your family.
Absolutely.
And, the self-care element and the self-help. Sure, I think in the question, there was also referring to it being constant, like this journey of self-help. It can be. You've got to remember to just be sometimes as well. It's not always like this chase and pursuit of healing all the time. Like sometimes there are spaces that you don't work on yourself. And we was actually just talking about this, wasn't we, about how I dip in and out of therapy. Like I'll have 3 months or 6 months and then I'll have a break, and I'll do different things, and I engage in lots of other well-being things. So there's other versions as well, which
there
are,
already
mentioned.
And I think as well, even in the question, talking about self-help, sometimes there has to be that willingness to hand things over. Because I think it does start with self, and self's really important, but actually handing it over and allowing other people into your world to help you as well. Because self-will can be a great thing in some ways, but can also be a dangerous thing where it's not working for people. So yes, self-help, it starts with you, but also hand it over, get people to help, and also let that help, let that sort of way that other people want to involve themselves embed itself in your life as well. Because if you're struggling to do it yourself and you come to others, there has to be that willingness to allow others to help as well.
Yeah, yeah. And in that, there's vulnerability. And I mean, we could go in all directions with this question, really, couldn't we? It's quite
It's a great question, isn't it? A really good one to start. Yeah, I like it.
So every time I try to talk about my past trauma, I either shut down emotionally or feel overwhelmed. How can I work on it if I can't even talk about it? How would you go with that one?
I think probably maybe a good starting point is why they can't talk about it. What is it within whatever's happened? We mentioned earlier about this hierarchy, and something doesn't have to be really traumatic to affect people. I think until they can open up about something, it's very difficult to seek any gateway into that world of theirs that is causing them some issue, some challenge. So it's almost trying. And I think what's very important here for me is the relationship. The relationship between ourselves and our clients is all built around the trust of clients being able to share things.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and starting to talk about these things. It might not happen in the first session, it might not happen in the 20th session, but at some point, you would hope that a client is able to start just to open up about this. The one thing that always intrigued me about counselling is the fact that when you talk to people about counselling who don't really know a lot about it, they talk about the fact that it's all about your childhood and your past. For me, it's not an archaeological dig. You're not dusting off old artifacts in somebody's past. What you're trying to do is trying to find staging posts in the past that make a difference now. And that can be difficult.
Yeah, this is very true. Some really beautiful points here that you made. I also can relate to them. For me, it's again about that relationship first. Number one, safety, trust, earning that client's trust. I've been talking about this a lot recently. People think because we're therapists that we've instantly got that trust, or clients also think that straight out it's there, and it's a relationship like any others. Like, we have to earn that trust, and I think that's right too. I think that I don't demand people's trust. I will work with them and try, exactly as you said, to work from where they're coming from, what makes them feel safe, what is it that they get from relationships they feel safe with, what's going to help in the room, is there self-care in place so that we can work on some of the deeper stuff. And the reason that I would assume in a lot of that question of shutting down, feeling emotional, how can I work on it if I can't talk about it? Well, it starts with the safety, doesn't it? Because you open up when you do feel that is there. So for me, I think it's around, exactly as you said, a lot of these key things, building the relationship, getting to know what's going on for them. And
confidentiality and safe space, as you mentioned. I think once clients understand that confidentiality, it's such an important aspect, that very safe space, whether it's face-to-face or whether it's a Zoom, there's a safe space at both ends, and subject to the very limited exceptions, that whatever they say will be between us.
I also think you made a really beautiful point of the hierarchy of trauma. I hear this a lot. So what's interesting is people that have had very traumatic experiences or really horrendous things happen will not want to talk about it because, is it big enough? Is it hard enough? People have been through worse than me. These kinds of comments, and it's not a measure, is it? It's not a comparison. And a trauma can be moving house even for some people. It can be changing schools when you were younger. It doesn't always have to be like abuse, worst case scenario, like some of the things that we work with. Sure, I do a lot of that kind of work, which is more extreme trauma, but also do a lot of other things. And there's no difference in how that person is seen if they're coming with, I'd like to work on this trauma. Like, it's not measured. It's what's going on for that person. And it's valid
how is it for them?
Exactly.
And the two best exponents of that as a theory, Viktor Frankl and Edith Eger, both were in concentration camps, both survived. And they've realized that whatever trauma they have been through, they don't try to strike any comparison with somebody that they're dealing with who might have been through something the subjectively is less or
Yeah.
objectively is less. So I think it's very important that, things can be very important for clients regardless of how serious, in inverted commas, they are to other people. It doesn't matter. It's what's important to the client.
Yeah, exactly. Good recommendations there. Anyone, I would recommend taking a deep dive on the Viktor Frankl. Someone I use a lot. Very inspiring story. Yeah, I think that's it, isn't it? And for me, I would define trauma as if something affects you emotionally, intensely, that has impacted your life, your relationship with yourself, your relationship with someone else, evoked massive fear. Like for me, that is trauma.
Yeah, and if it's enduring, I think that explains a lot for clients where these events can occur, come and go, and that's fine. But if the psychological side of it, if the emotions still sit with that in an enduring way, weeks, months, years later, then don't just think about putting it in a box and leaving it. That box, the more that you can think about opening the box, bringing it to bear, talking about it, exploring it, helping, to bring that out in a way that you feel as if it's no longer hidden. It's always finding those lighter rooms in the house, isn't it?
Yeah.
And we talked a lot in therapy in terms of not being in the attic or being in the basement, but trying to move into the lighter rooms, trying to share things through that.
Yeah. I agree. Actually, I think you've also touched on something good there too. Of it's not always worst case scenario, and you don't have to be in crisis completely to access therapy. Those lighter rooms, as you put it, can be important. And some people want to work on self-development. It's not always like the trauma stuff, the crisis stuff, or I feel completely broken. It can be looking at the things that are going well, or wanting to progress in your career and doing some self-awareness stuff. I personally have accessed therapy a lot of times to explore myself, my identity, not in crisis, just because I love self-exploration. Sometimes people think it can be, I have to be in the worst case before I access help.
No, it's not. And that's a really good point, because if we're expecting clients to be doing this and opening up and exploring, then we should be able to do that. We should have that ability, that willingness that at least matches clients. My own self-awareness, bringing myself into the session in a way that I can actually, I can exhibit that empathy with the client and step into the client's shoes and try to see things through the client's lens rather than through my own.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think that's very important, because there is an element, there's a fine line, isn't there, of use of self and empathy and coming from the client's perception. And yeah, there's even a well-disputed topic of self-disclosure. I mean, we're kind of going as a bit of a sidestep from these questions a little bit here.
But an interesting one,
yeah, I use self-disclosure as a therapist when it's appropriate and when it benefits the client. And I also think it's important to show up as human, because people don't want to just talk to a robot, otherwise they'd go to AI. It's a human connection. And you touched on it earlier already with the relationship stuff. It is important. And a lot of the feedback that I get from my clients is around showing up as myself, and I practice what I preach and all of these things, because it's really important in the relationship, and also go into those depths. It builds the trust. It builds layers of kind of information between you in the room, in the therapeutic situation.
Space,
So
it's being congruent. It's being authentic, I think, is a lovely word that encapsulates it, in terms of, not wearing masks and personas and trying to be somebody different in different scenarios. The more that I'm trying to be myself in the counselling room, I find the more that clients will be themselves. And I think for me, that's really important, that I leave my baggage at the door. I might have had a bad day. There may be issues in my life. I can't bring those into sessions. I've got to work on myself enough to know that I can come in unencumbered by that.
Yeah, I agree. It's actually something that I preach, as you'll know, to all of the therapists at Silver Linings, to be human, take yourself into the room, but not in a way that it is affecting the sessions, and do the self-awareness, do the self-care, look after yourselves. And it takes an enormous amount, as you know, to do the training and be a therapist, but it is important, isn't it? And it's an honor too. Like, this role is very special, so
Yeah.
it shouldn't be taken lightly as a responsibility.
Yeah, and what a privilege it is for clients to share things with me that they won't share with other people. So one client recently would say to me, for example, that they wanted to bring things that they couldn't talk to their friends about. That they thought they wanted to bring things that are just for counselling. So we can almost cordon off certain areas and issues and events and challenges to them in a way that I feel that is for us to work, and that's for them, in the therapy room.
Yeah, completely. Okay, let's go with another question.
Okay.
Setting boundaries makes me feel selfish and then guilty. I worry that I'll hurt others' feelings or push them away. How can I communicate better? Oh, this is a good one. Boundaries comes up a lot in sessions.
Yeah, it does. It does. And also, I think it goes to the heart of maybe people's difficulties with communication, and having the assertiveness in that communication. And I think it's probably worth just pausing there to look at how people communicate, because you've got this sort of, people can be assertive and get the point forward, but you also can have people who are being quite passive. And for me, being passive is allowing other people to make decisions for you.
Yeah.
In the same way that being aggressive is making decisions for them. I think assertive just sits nicely in the middle as to the way to properly communicate. And you have to, before you start to communicate, I think, have a good idea of boundaries, and don't let the boundaries be swayed and moved. I think it's very important that people set the boundaries on different things in life and stick with them. It's too easy, and it's too easy to be that sort of a little bit cowardly maybe, and just to let it slip because you get a bit of pushback on it.
Yeah, this comes up a lot, and especially the people-pleasing element. And a good point with the passive-aggressive, because this itself can be something that causes more problems and then makes the communication harder. And that clear and concise communication is really important, isn't it? In any relationship, actually, but especially around boundaries. And I suppose for me, something that's important to recognize is, what are your boundaries, firstly, as well as communicating them? Because so many people, when I ask them, will say they don't know what their boundaries are. When we explore them, they'll then go into them, because everyone's boundaries are completely different, and for lots of different reasons as well. And then if you know yourself enough, it then gives you more confidence in communicating that too.
Yeah, I think it's thinking about them, and you're right that people's boundaries can be on shifting sands. It's almost feel that they've got them quite well set before they know that the sands have moved and their boundaries have moved. So I think it is, people have to think about them, especially the important boundaries. Relationship boundaries are a really good aspect of that. In relationships, without thinking about it, we all set boundaries. But sometimes those boundaries can move if it's for the right reason.
Very true.
Yeah, but sometimes boundaries just need to be quite firmly set. Boundaries around what happens between, you and your partner in terms of the relationship, in terms of behavior, in terms of any elements of maybe control and stuff that comes into it.
Yeah, I think that's important too, isn't it? There is different versions of boundaries as well with different people.
Yeah.
The ones with your partner, I'm assuming in some cases, people want it to be their most trusting. So the boundaries, they will know them, they'll be living in them in a healthy relationship, ideally, in an ideal world. But then ones between colleagues, peers, friends, a stranger in the street, very different boundaries, isn't there? And then it is communicating them appropriately to the different people too, just to make it even more complicated.
It is, yeah. But if people can move towards at least being willing to express them in an assertive way, I think that's a nice mid-ground where you set your boundaries, and actually the question is about whether that hurts people. Well, if the boundaries are properly set, it doesn't hurt anybody. It actually can go the other way, that you can end up hurting yourself if you're just slipping and sliding with the boundaries.
Yeah, I think that does come up a lot, actually, too. The fear of speaking up and then losing someone, or hurting the other person, hurting yourself, exactly as you said in that. And the best way to avoid that overall is to communicate. So even when it's hard, even when it's bringing up so much emotion, and trying to discuss it openly and honest and vulnerable, raw, real, and
Yeah,
that's the
absolutely.
best way to avoid it, because otherwise it then doesn't, as you've already said, come out in passive aggressive, and it can build resentment, and there's so many things that go wrong when boundaries are not put in, and that's without the safety element as well, isn't it?
And don't think that you're the one at fault in expressing the boundaries in the way that you want to do it. It's not always you. If somebody is pushing back on the boundaries, then you have to look at them, not you. Don't always assume, don't always take it on board and think it's my fault and therefore I'll retreat from the boundaries. Fortify yourself in a way that you think, I'm right in this, and stand your ground.
Yeah, yeah, very true.
An interesting one, though.
I struggle with intrusive thoughts, sometimes out of nowhere. I know they aren't real, but they still cause me anxiety. Why does this happen, and how do they stop them crippling me? This is a very good question. There are so many people that have intrusive thoughts and dark thoughts, and the amount of people that think there's something wrong with them because of these things. And I mean, it's fascinating, isn't it? The thought processes that we go down, and we naturally, as human beings, being complex, will have dark and intrusive thoughts sometimes, and they're generally built on fear, aren't they? So if we work on the fear a lot of the time and try and reflect and build the awareness, we can then start to reduce some of those intrusive thoughts. But it's not about hiding away or listening to them, because some of them can be really distressing. Completely hear this person who's unfortunately struggling with this, but it's trying to jump through some of the fear, finding things that help with fear. And fear itself is not necessarily a negative. It's part of our human experience that we need to, and it's something we can challenge. And when we do that, and when we work through some of this stuff, in turn it reduces some of those intrusive thoughts, and we start to be more confident, be more self-assured, have more self-worth, and not have it control us so much.
Yeah, really good points. Really good points. The human mind can only store one thought at the forefront at any given time. And if that thought, as in this example, is an intrusive thought and is something that's more difficult, you've got to try to work out a way to displace that thought. But always think about that there must be better thoughts around the corner. And you've got to tap into that well. You've got to find them and bring them to bear. And it's not always easy, but if you have that thought process around, I don't want to keep this, it is causing me anxiety or stress or whatever, then at least register that, clock that you've got it, and try to work out ways to think about something that is just better for you.
Yeah. Ironically, I've written about some things around this, and knowing that it'll pass, exactly as you said, not sitting with it completely. Important to sit with it in some ways. The knowledge of knowing it will pass, I think, can be really empowering in any difficult situation. Sure, again, there are some things that are horrendous, but when you kind of get into the mindset of knowing this will pass, and keep sitting with it, keep knowing that change is coming, keep trying to work on yourself. And it can be relentless. It's easy for me to sit here and say, keep at it, keep working on yourself. When you've got intrusive thoughts like this, it can be really difficult, but you have to know yourself, know your triggers, know what's going on for you, know where the fear is. When you can work on yourself and know that you can sit through some of this stuff and have things to hand that help, have people that know you really well, speak to your therapist about it, speak to whoever it is. It's not always a therapist. And when you can build yourself up around it, it doesn't have so much control over you. And again, easy for me to say, sat here in a very nice room, having a very nice conversation. But when you're in something like this, it can be really traumatizing itself and really, really fear-provoking. But these bits around it are what give you the power back.
Yeah. recognizing that's really important, recognizing the underlying fear. To do that in a way that you then start to take ownership of where that comes from. I think therapy as well is a place to work on that. Where is the fear? Sometimes the fear doesn't jump out as something that is easily identifiable, but actually working in therapy, finding that fear, working on that, exploring it, is something that will help those thoughts hopefully to just gradually disappear.
Yeah, I think this is an important one too. Sitting with that fear and exploring this fear, exactly as you said, bringing it to therapy or wherever it is that you work on yourself. And we often avoid these emotions of guilt, shame, fear, jealousy. We avoid them like the plague, and then we have them spill out in relationships, in the relationship with ourselves, in our motivation, in our mindset, in our confidence. And then we just again try and avoid it, distract, suppress it, and it just keeps coming around in this cycle. And it's really important to actually explore it, to sit with it,
Yes.
to be like, oh, this thing is making me scared. I have massive fear about this, and normalizing it too, because these emotions are just as important and they're there to be explored. They're all an emotional sat nav almost. They guide us in our lives. And it is through the exploration and the reflections that we learn about ourselves. And ultimately, that is where we can make better choices, can have healthier relationships and life around it.
Absolutely. And those 4 words, this too will pass, they're easy to say, but to assemble them in a way that that's going to work for somebody, it may just take time. And recognizing the fear. Stepping in the same puddle is a real problem, isn't it? Every day, some people will just do that and then think, well, I've stepped in that, but hey, that's life, and then move on. Actually working on all of that can change your life.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, knowing it's not linear, because fear and guilt and shame, all of these things can come back up at any point.
Yes.
And it doesn't mean that we failed.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, let's go with one more. I feel like I've spent my entire life doing everything for everyone else, and I feel a bit lost for myself. What can I do?
Interesting one. I'm going to throw that back at you.
Sure. I mean, there's so much in this, isn't there? We are given a timeline in a lot of ways, and we are conditioned, and we think we should do a lot of things in our lives, and we compare, and there's so much where you could go with this question. It's a very big one. Thank you for challenging us on this one. We did ask for a challenge, and whoever this person is,
you've definitely
delivered,
got it.
so thank you. It is easy to lose yourself amongst all of the things that we are dealing with and this overstimulation of life that we've created for ourselves, but it's about connecting back to yourself. So who am I? What do I want? What do I stand for? What do I represent? Who are the kind of people I want in my life? What makes me feel joy, love, inspired, empowered? And really connecting with those things in your life. And it doesn't necessarily have to be attached to a job or anything, which people automatically assume, but it can be when you do those things that you make choices and function from who you are in all of those areas, rather than I should be doing this, or they're doing this, maybe I'll try that, or I have been told to do this since I was a child, so I'm going to continue doing it, or again, around emotions. I feel sad or low every day. Well, that's a sign that your needs are not met. So yeah, very big question, this one. We could go in lots of directions, but ultimately the work that you do on yourself, again, in whatever capacity you do that, it's about connecting back to yourself and living a life based on what and who you want to be.
Yeah, yeah. Because people pleasing at its heart is a type of learned behavior that's not at the worst end of learned behavior, trying to be nice and to please and all that. But it's not just an element of kindness here. it's almost taking away your own will and your own self of being and just allowing somebody else to intrude upon that by saying, well, I'm just going to do it for them and I'm going to please them and I'm doing it for other people. At some point, it's about ownership, I think, as well, connection and ownership with yourself, and starting to think, I don't need to do that just to please people all the time. You know, there is stuff I can do for myself in a way that actually I'm deriving something from it rather than just literally just doing stuff for other people all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we could swing back into boundaries in this from what you just said exactly there too. And it is learning those things and being able to say no and being able to not agree to things that don't align with who you are and who you want to be, these kinds of things. And there is, I mean, it's classic conditions of worth, isn't it? When we have other people tell us who we should be or who show us love for doing certain things, which can also come into it a lot as well. Lots of childhood things can link in as well. We can then feel that that's normal and it can distort our patterns of behaviour and so many things, self-worth. We then create a life around us that is not necessarily the true version of what's going on in our inner world.
Yeah. And sometimes it's just creating an easier life. And that is not just an easier life for ourselves, that could be easier for other people. And in relationship terms, that's sometimes the easy way to do it, just to allow, you know, the other person to dictate the terms of how we live our lives. And taking some ownership and starting to think about, well, maybe I need to change that. Maybe I need to reset. Maybe I need to reframe certain things in the way that I do it. And again, it might just be small changes to start with.
Yeah,
you know, this is not about this massive jump. This isn't standing on the edge of a cliff and thinking, I've got to take this big leap of faith. This might just be small changes to start with that will then build into bigger changes in your life.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's important to recognize as well, doing things for other people can be nice, sure, and we want to support the people we love. We want to help people. As a human race, it would do as well to help more people. But at the same time, you have to ask as well in that, do I have space for this right now?
Yeah.
Do I have headspace for it? Do I have the resources? Do I have the energy? And when you work from a place of asking those questions to yourself first, you can help other people, but you can also check in with yourself too. Do I have the energy for this? And I think there's just so much in that question.
Yeah.
It's a very all-rounded one. But
it is.
There's a lot to take into account in what we do for others, what we do for ourselves, and then merging those together.
There comes a point where you have to think about self, and that's not being selfish, but it just means starting to think about what nourishes us as well. You know, what is it that we need to cherish and think about ourselves as well as other people. And I don't think that's being selfish. I think that is giving ourselves something that's important.
Yeah. I mean, it's the ultimate self-care, isn't it, to be fair? We often talk about self-care as doing a face mask or running a bath with a candle, which are lovely and definitely self-care. I love those things. However, self-care is doing the work on yourself too, isn't it? Facing yourself, facing your fears, all of these things that we've spoken about today. And it is when you work from a place, function from a place of looking after your own needs, wants and desires. And exactly as you said, it's not selfish, it's self-care.
It is. And that life beyond doing that is something that is worth exploring. By making these changes in their lives, people will feel differently and will feel better about themselves. And that really means feeling better about others as well.
Yeah. Well, I think we've answered some very good questions today.
Yeah.
And like I say, I will try and do some content based around them and make sure all of them are acknowledged. Some of them have cross-referenced actually in some of the discussions I noticed that we had today. But Ian, I just wanted to ask you, what pearls of wisdom would you have for someone struggling with anything right now?
Wow, that is a great question. Yeah, I think people, believing in themselves is the most important aspect for me. Whatever whatever noise happens outside in terms of people, how people think of you, how people perceive you, I think external validation can only go so far to actually helping somebody. Internal validation, having belief in yourself. I'm always absolutely staggered by the way that people can handle problems, deal with issues, as long as they have some belief. It's what we call self-actualizing, but it's so important to have that trust in yourself that you can do it. Because whatever other people will say and however they will try to help you, it will always fall upon you to do it. And you can.
Yeah, I agree. And in some of the worst times of people's lives, a lot of the time, there's something, isn't there? There's something deep, even in the worst kind of days, the worst experience. There's something deep in all of us. I mean, you could link Viktor Frankl into this again of, it's kind of in your mind and in your soul sometimes, even when you're like absolutely on rock bottom, you can always somehow dig deep and manage to get through. And unfortunately, that's not always the case for everyone. We do lose some people to suicide, but the majority. And I think that does come from, exactly as you said, that innate belief of yourself and really nourishing that and really working on yourself and really giving yourself that authenticity and all of these things that we've spoken about today and doing what's right for you.
Recognize how deep your well might be. If you're pulling from your own well and you're only looking so far down and it looks dark, it looks bleak, you can go further. You can always go further. You know, we all operate at a certain percentage of our capability. There's always more to pull from.
Yeah, and that's a nice one to leave it on, remind people of, those that are struggling, that there is that well to pull from, even when it doesn't feel like it's the case. Thank you for listening, and a reminder to process, learn and evolve.
Thank you.